Dan, how are you?
Doing really well.
I did think it was fitting because founders are we're personalities in our own right. We build the businesses the way we see them. And I think you have had your own experience in building a business, sort of creating a culture. I remember a couple of years ago, speaking of wars, but you were sitting at an 8VC conference, and it was Andy Clark, the CFO, former CFO of C.H. Robinson, Jeff Silver, the founder of Coyote, and you were in the middle, and Jeff was giving you an enormously hard time about how, he had invented everything, and basically. But you had to fight some of your own battles in building the business. Talk a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, by the way. It's a really cool event. Man, I remember that. I also remember you were in the audience.
I was.
Then he started attacking on me too. So
he turned on me right after. I deflected some of the tension, I think.
Yeah, I think he had really good points though in some ways. Because what I also realize is when you're trying to change how something's done, categorically it can feel the same as something else. So you're like, oh, it's not different. We were trying to build a flexible drop and hook program with spot drop and hook and dynamically relocated trailer pools. And I remember his feedback was, all the brokers do drop and hook. And I was like, well, you go find a carrier to do it for you. It's different. And so just those nuances were unique. And I think that goes back to actually, if you think about the history of Convoy, when you're starting a company, you kind of have two choices around the risk you take. There's lots of other risks that exist in the world that you're going to face, but you get to pick from these two. Every business has, let's call it execution risk, which is, can I execute the playbook of this industry or this business really well? It may also have existential risk or strategic risk, which is, I'm actually going to approach the problem that everyone else is solving one way. I'm going to try to approach it a different way. And there's a spectrum. Convoy was very far on the spectrum of, we're going to try a new way to do this. Many of us didn't come from the industry. We're going to start from first principles. We're going to go talk to hundreds of carriers and shippers and brokers and just kind of find out what's working and not working. And then use available technology. At that time, it was big data machine learning, which is kind of the first generation of AI, and it was mobile. And those two things gave us this opportunity to get all of these carriers and drivers online, and then to try to train systems that could automate or make more efficient, faster, higher quality a lot of the systems. But that was truly existential kind of like risk or strategic risk, because we weren't just trying to take the playbook that existed and do it really well. And companies or people that have only really lived in businesses, which is 99% of businesses in the country, that are execution risk businesses, like can I out-execute my competitors in the known playbook? It's very hard to understand what it means or understand why some company would go the other route. You're like, why are they raising this money? Why are they spending this money? And a lot of it is, I call it a transition tax. When you're trying to take an old way of doing business or an old approach to something, maybe it's still the best approach in the long run, but at the time it's the current one, and you're saying, I'm going to try to change that and I'm going to take a different approach. You have to pay a tax because you're trying to get all these people to change their behavior, you're inventing the technology, you're teaching things. It's a lot. So I think that's really the setup in my mind for what we were doing with Convoy, and I'm not saying this just looking back. I remember in 2015 or it was 16, one of my first board decks, I wrote this whole thing about the transition tax we were going to pay. And I went to my board and said, okay, we're trying to do this. For example, one other example, in every other brokerage I talked to and studied, the operating model or the way to kind of like organize the company was relatively easy in some ways. Brokerage is really complicated, but if you set your compensation up and your incentives so that if your team makes a bigger spread on a load or makes more money, they get paid more, and the company makes more money, then everybody wins. But if you have to say, actually, we're going to go meddle with that. We're going to take loads, and we're going to pull them out of that system and have a computer figure out how to price it or to match it, and it's going to get it wrong a ton. You're going to have to pay all this tax of trying to learn how to teach a computer to do it, for example, and you can't like optimize the system because with people, because those people are, pulled out of it and you're letting the computer make those calls. And that's like a hard thing to run in parallel to a human system. It's like, so that was some of the complicated things we looked at. And, I look at that and I'm like, that was a really, ambitious, transformative effort to go take that existential risk on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking back to the Jeff Silver moment, and I think one of the things that Jeff got wrong, that you understood instinctively, and I think this is true of so many Silicon Valley companies, is that what you had done at Convoy was figured out how to tell a story about a problem and how you're solving it. And I think our industry, this is the thing, Jeff, when I asked the question, why do you have a problem with Convoy? Jeff goes, I have a problem with you, and points at me because he says, you're the one inflating these stories and stuff. And what I pointed out to Jeff was what Convoy understands that I think so many incumbents don't understand or didn't understand was that you were telling a story, like you were embracing the marketing, the opportunity to tell a story. I think you understood that. Unfortunately, we know now that your vision for the business, you don't get to achieve your goal. What you built this great technology stack, and Flexport's now acquired it, and they would attest that it's quietly sophisticated. In fact, I had done some conversation with people in the industry that had looked at your business and had said that you guys, your tech was legit. These are companies that competed against you, but at the end had the opportunity to check it out, said your tech was absolutely legit. But something happened along the way. What is the portion of the story that you can share? What exactly does that look like?
So I want to first, I'm going to get to that. I want to first address the storytelling thing you mentioned. Because I think this is important for any entrepreneur out there, anybody, honestly, any business, not just a business that's considered a startup, it's every business. And it's more fun to work on something that's a story too. And I think that's the way people communicate. That's how you remember things. It's how your customers want to kind of think about what they can become. And so storytelling wasn't just about, trying to make a big name for Convoy. It was very much a part of the company. We had a weekly show and tell where employees would get up and tell the story and what they were building, and we would talk about the story of the company every week, what was happening. And it was a way to, get this group of people that didn't know each other before Convoy to feel like they were on a mission together and to embrace the same things. And then when we talked to our customers or we talked to potential employees, there was a story around what we were doing. And it makes it so much more enjoyable, and it's also much easier to communicate things that way. But you're right, the story of Convoy didn't end how I wanted it to end. I am very happy that the brand of Convoy and the spirit of what we're doing lives on, and that it's actually kind of up and running, relaunched, and fully embraced again, in the carrier community. But it went through a pretty challenging time, and it's hard to, I can distill it down to a bunch of things. I spent a lot of time when we had to transition Convoy, wind it down, relaunch it at Flexport. I wrote a lot. I think I wrote like 17 pages of learnings. I was like, I learned a lot from that. That was the silver lining of it. And ultimately what went wrong is we made some decisions and took some of these really big bets. It cost a lot to do that. It was an expensive thing to teach, a system how to get pricing right. Because pricing, if you do pricing wrong, if you're trying to train a technology to learn how to negotiate, price, et cetera, it takes a lot of data and a lot of time. It took us probably 5 years until our automated system could cover about 98, 99% of loads at better than industry average margins. So at the end, we didn't have a carrier sales team. We had this machine that was effectively, automating that matching at just above kind of the industry average gross margin. And a lot of other things were trending in that direction. Like we lowered our operating costs per load, I think by 40% in the last year. But it took a really long time to get there. And I think it took a lot longer than I expected. We also, and these are things that we could have made different decisions on. We made some really large bets. I remember in 2019, we decided to go national with a trailer pool, and we had an idea for flexible drop and hook. For the first time, we added a lot of assets to our business. We took on a lot of contract risk right at the end of 2019, Q3, Q4. And obviously with COVID hitting, that was a really painful decision because the rates shot up. We had all these assets, we had all these contracts, we had to kind of figure that out. So there were some moments along the way that were really expensive and really challenging. But ultimately, I think also we didn't want to give up on the vision. And we really believed that it wasn't one piece of Convoy that was like the answer, it was the whole system. And so I think we could have done things, as the market was changing, as the world was evolving, to dismantle some parts of our system, to break it up in different ways, and maybe continue on in a different way. But we decided not to do it. One, because we really believed in what we were doing, and two, because there were some strategic opportunities we were looking at where we thought, okay, we can take this technology, as you mentioned, this automated capacity engine, this flexible, trailer system, this, automated operation system, and combine it with other companies that had huge amounts of freight and potentially come out with a really big win-win situation. If you remember at the time, Convoy for Brokers was kind of up and running, and I think a couple dozen companies were using it, which that program was, we allowed any other broker to put their freight onto the Convoy marketplace so that carriers could see it and bid on it and accept it. And what was so cool about that is it ran in full parallel sync to their system. So they could have their team calling, booking loads with people, and at the same time, we were putting that load into our marketplace. And if we found a better carrier at a better rate, we would just automatically pull it off their board. And so they worked in sync. And I think the metric was, I remember the stat was like about 20% of the time, we would be able to find a carrier for an average of $100 less than what they found. So because we could do them in parallel, it just lowered costs. So we're like, that's a great model. Combine our technology with other people's freight, and that could be a big business. But ultimately, the strategy we had to do that got delayed. And then the strategy we had to merge with another company that had a lot of freight also fell through. And so we were left in a situation where we couldn't sustain the business, and we hadn't made a different strategic decision early enough.
Yeah, I think you had the same enemy. I was talking to David about waking up every morning wanting to go kick somebody's ass. I think there was a period of time where you were sort of thinking the same way.
We probably also motivated a lot of people.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, just because you guys were in some ways fighting a system that was also fighting against you in some ways, and some of the participants in the market. But at the end, when you were sort of shifting, a lot of it, as I understand it, I don't know what you can discuss publicly, was you had opportunities that just, for whatever reason, you were not able to sort of see those to the end. Any context to that? I know there's some, you're concerned about just any context to.
Well, I will say we did have, certainly companies looked at us and said, what is Convoy doing? We don't understand it. They're getting too much hype around this business. They are, I don't know, we don't like the way they're approaching this. But I think there were a lot of other companies in our industry that really did respect the effort we were putting in and the work we were doing. And they would hear from shippers and customers that the product was really good. The service was great. We were able to run programs that no other broker would really run, like dedicated level services at extremely high quality rates, performance rates. So there were a lot of companies interested in that technology and those capabilities we had built. And we did have a lot of, I would say, at least collaborators, if not allies in the industry. And so some of them did show interest early on, actually, even before we considered going down that path, some of them came out to Seattle and were really interested. I can't get into the nuances of that, but ultimately it didn't happen. And I still think it would have been a really, really valuable thing for the industry because it was continuing to get better. And as I mentioned, these things, they take time. They took certainly a lot longer than I thought to get all the technology in the right place and to fully automate this. But it was a sequential thing. It was get all the carriers on an app. When we first started, I remember I went to a conference, it was in Florida, and people just didn't think that carriers would use an app. And they didn't think that they would let their drivers go on an app. And they didn't think they would book loads automatically, like without talking to somebody. And these were all things we kind of had to do and figure out. And so that was just an extremely long journey.
So what is the legacy? Convoy has lived on or lives on with Flexport. Your journey is you've now left, as I understand, Convoy. What do you want the legacy of Convoy to be, looking back to your tenure?
I think one thing I really want, and I've seen, is we've led to a lot of other disruption in the industry. Actually, a lot of people came out of Convoy and started new companies. There's people in the audience who started companies coming out of Convoy. So I think one thing is just this ethos of innovation and trying to push different parts of the industry forward, building technology, building software, changing business models, challenging kind of the status quo. And I think that is something I'm really excited about seeing. Like, I know people are doing that. I think another one is, just believing that a lot of the things that people didn't expect to happen. For example, getting the entire industry, think about 85, 90,000 carriers, to start using this platform, getting people online. Like, that was something we really pushed. And at the time, nobody was online. And so I think, that was a huge lift that Convoy brought, which was, how do you just take this offline world and kind of make it online so everybody else can start building on top of that as well. That will be a legacy of what we've done. And I think, if you look now at the world with AI coming out and so many other kind of transformative technologies, if I was doing this again today, I would do it probably completely differently. I think the rules have changed, and so now there's a huge opportunity for new companies to come and disrupt again.
What would you do? Like, if you were to start the business from scratch, what would you do today?
Yeah, I think, so Convoy started in 2015, late 2014 is when we started working on it. At the time, the only way you could really drive this kind of change was you had to get everybody onto a new platform. You had to get the carriers onto an app. So we went out there and did a bunch of work to get all these carriers onto an app. And the only way they would use the Convoy app is if we had loads for them. So we said, okay, well, we really have to become a brokerage. There's no other way we're going to get this business relationship with them. So we started a brokerage, started learning how to be a broker, and using every single load we got at the beginning as a carrot to get a new carrier on. We would take a load, get a carrier to sign up, and say, hey, the load's waiting for you in the app. And then they would start using the app. And that's how we got the flywheel going, market by market, city by city, lane by lane. Thousands, this took a lot of energy. So, that's how you did it back then, because you had to get everyone onto this platform so they could digitally interact. There was no other way to do it. Today, that's not necessary. You can meet them on the platforms they're already using with AI. You can use AI to make a voice phone call to a carrier or to somebody else in the industry. You can use AI to read emails and write emails, to read text and write text, and it's only getting better. So instead of going and, trying to get everyone to change their behavior and start using a new app and do business in a different way, I would embrace the existing platforms, voice, text, email, that they're already using, and I would use AI to essentially build the same kind of system, just with those platforms. Much less challenging.
You don't need a market, you're saying.
One
of the sort of core theses of all of the Silicon Valley or venture-funded platforms, the digital brokers, if you will, digital matching, was that everyone had to have a platform. That was sort of the...
Yep.
If there's anything consistent among the stories of all these companies, it was everybody had a platform. You're saying that a platform is not required in this generation because of AI technology?
There probably are still benefits to having an app that somebody uses that you can, do a lot of things in, but not like, I'd say yes, the need for a new platform, not just in freight or in this kind of business, but in so many different industries where you're bringing people together, is not as necessary anymore. Because the reason you build that platform, so they log into that website or they open that app, is so that you can show them the loads and you can automate the interactions and you can get them to give you information there and you can do it all in an automated way. But if instead an AI could just email them or call them or text them and they could write back, or their agent's writing back on their behalf, maybe every truck driver has their own agent at some point that's negotiating loads on their behalf, you don't need to create a new medium or space for everyone to interact. Just interact the way you've always interacted. You just might be talking to a robot or emailing a robot, which is what's kind of happening right now.
The marketplace liquidity has always been the issue, right? Like, how do you build a liquid marketplace? That's been if you look at all of the money that's been spent in the digitization of brokerage for the sort of we'll call it maybe these are Gen 2 businesses, Gen 1 business, depends on how you sort of look at it. So much of the money was spent on how to drive liquidity. You talked about building a brokerage. You're saying that the liquidity that these companies have tried to build, Convoy included, isn't required in this generation due to AI technology. These effectively robotic machines that are out doing the work for them.
Well, I think you still, like any marketplace still needs liquidity because you need a lot of suppliers that want to provide the service, which in this case are trucking companies and carriers. But the way you can reach them and add them to your network and engage with them can be via all the channels that they were already using, calling them, texting them, sending them emails. You don't need to ask them to go use a new app.
Including the existing load board technologies.
I think that a lot of load boards could evolve to that as well. Or you could, like maybe the need to post it there, like that is a platform that, yeah, people are using that. Maybe that's not as necessary. That's the way people go find it today. So, maybe there's an automated system where instead of having to look at a load board, you go to a website or an email, or maybe you're getting texts when loads are super relevant for you, or you're getting phone calls, or you call in and say, show me or talk me through the 5 loads that are best for me right now. And the system already knows what 5 loads are best for you. I just think the whole way you can interact is different. And whatever somebody likes to do in terms of how they get their information and interact, you can just meet them there. And I think you're right, in sort of the way Silicon Valley and a lot of platforms and marketplaces have evolved, they all required you to go somewhere to engage with it. And I think the biggest difference we're seeing now is that's not required anymore.
Because the technology can meet them where they're at.
Yeah, there was no other way to automate it. For example, if they didn't go to the Convoy app to look at all the loads we had on the Convoy app, someone had to call them and tell them the load was there, or maybe text or email them about that load and walk them through it and go back and forth. But now, with intelligence, that's not necessary anymore. And I don't know how it's all going to play out. There's some companies that are building this technology now, and when I used it and demoed it, Happy Robot's one that has this phone call system. I think they're demoing later today, and it's pretty incredible. It sounds like you're talking to a person. And so, I think Sam Altman, the guy who runs OpenAI, he had said, I think he said at one point, the future of startups could be one person and 10,000 computers or 10,000 GPUs. And I was in San Francisco a month ago, and I met somebody who's starting a new broker, and they said, look, I want to build the next Convoy. And I was like, what's your plan? They're like, I'm just doing it myself with a couple other people. And we're going to use these 17 services that just do all the pieces for us. Now, I don't know how that's going to play out. That seems, I feel like from what I learned, there's still a ton of relationships that really matter, and you have to be able to get on the phone and talk to somebody because things don't always go right when you use technology. But I'm just saying for the technology component.
The shipper sale side, I've seen a number of startups that are just pure tech. And the thing that they have never answered for me is how are you going to solve the customer shipper side, sale side? Because it's still a human. At the end of the day, if we've learned anything, is that human relationships actually matter. Yeah. And I think oftentimes that's the discounted part of, if there is something to be said as a sort of a traditional industry insider sort of observing, I think oftentimes Silicon Valley companies, the companies that come out of tech, are typically engineer driven, and they sort of forget that this is still a relationship business.
I think that's true in many cases. And like I mentioned, we automated a lot of the pieces of the system at Convoy, but I and many others at Convoy still spent a lot of time getting to know and work with our customers, every day, on the phone, in person, et cetera. And I think even if the automation of the system moves from an app platform to natural language using AI, there's still going to be all sorts of stuff that go wrong and it doesn't work right, and you're still going to need to have a relationship and figure things out on the phone. It doesn't solve all the problems. It's just a new way of getting the technology piece done.
So Dan, before I let you go, I got to ask, what's next for you?
I don't know the answer to that yet. I'll kind of preview. I'm thinking about a few things. This whole idea of not needing to build a platform to go build a really interesting service is one of the things that's driving some of the thinking that I have. And I'd say another one is, as a customer of software companies at Convoy, I spent a lot of time using SaaS applications within the company. And I felt like, the way that software kind of worked together, if you imagine you have a TMS or a WMS or these other kind of ERP systems to run your business, how those all interact with your HR applications, your recruiting applications, your CRM. I think the way that software works could be a lot better. So thinking about some ideas in that space, but I unfortunately don't know yet.
When will we hear? Is there an announcement imminent, or
nothing is imminent?
We're still exploring it.
Nothing's imminent. I do want to kind of get my head I want to get this figured out this year because I have some ideas and I'm kind of starting to pursue these different tracks. So maybe we'll come back and talk about it next year.
So Dan, I wanted to close on one point, and I think you said something that I think should be pointed out. And I've heard this from so many people, is that what Convoy did was it made trucking cool. Is you guys embraced the sort of blue collar, we like to say the sort of red, like really the blue collar working sort of element of it, and you made the story of cool. You brought people who would not have looked at logistics as an industry to build careers on and build businesses on. And I think if there is anything to be said about Convoy's story, that's the part that absolutely you should get credit and your team should get credit for actually bringing people into this industry. And perhaps as much as anybody has done.
I do think we brought a lot of people in the industry. I mean, look, the movie Convoy was our inspiration originally. That was actually where we came up with the name and watched that a bunch of times. So there was already, trucking was kind of already a kind of badass, difficult job and industry. And so we just kind of embraced that. And I think what we did is we highlighted a lot of the carriers. We really tried to say, look, these are the people that are driving trucks, doing a lot of the work, need to be appreciated, and we need to also give them tools to grow their business, help them run it better. We've made baseball cards. I think we had the Hall Stars program, highlight the best carriers, just kind of elevate them in the story. And I think we brought a lot of people to Freight Tech, I'd say. And in Seattle, I think there's a ton of companies doing this now. And as I mentioned, I think there's about 40 companies that have started out of Convoy at this point.
Well, Dan, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming to join us today. Wish you best of luck on your next journey. Hopefully you'll come tell us about it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Dan Lewis, everybody.
Thanks, man.